I should have done that. So I went to General Assembly, and I know I did a PowerPoint a couple weeks ago on my biblical storytelling. So you might be asking, oh, and it's going to be on church polity. Great. So glad I came here today, says Bev Miller. It's going to be exciting, I can tell already. Isn't this better suited for a lunch and learn? Huh? Am I just taking advantage of a captive audience? You don't get a choice to come back? Is it just an excuse for being lazy in the summer? Yes. But, you know, there's some good stuff in here. I'm going to run through some of this just to kind of give us all level set, because unlike in the 20th century, most of us did not grow up in the Presbyterian church. We come from other walks of life. And so each church has a different polity and governance as well as theology. So for Presbyterians, and I've said this many times before, but we come out of the Reformed tradition with Luther and Calvin and Zwingli and the rest of them, which basically says we think we should get our direction from the Bible directly, as opposed to going through bishops and priests and along those lines. And that's obviously what took place for the Reformation. For Presbyterians in particular, we read a lot of passages, particularly from Acts, where there's a lot of shared leadership. You know, they all kind of voted who was going to replace Judas. They voted about having deacons and Stephen being the first ones. And everyone was equal, if you will. So Presbyteros, of course, we know means elder. And then in Presbyterians, we have ruling elders and teaching elders. Teaching elders, the average person you think of as a minister, like the one who's preaching and has been ordained and all that. And the ruling elders are on the church council. But the reason we have it we call it this way, is because they have equal voting. So ministers are not above, the average congregant. And so when we have any kind of deliberative body, session, presbytery, and so on, it's equal. They always want an equal number of ruling elders and teaching elders, lay people and ministers, as well as obviously men and women and people of color and such. And the other thing is that we're all democratically elected. So, I mean, yes, there are things that are appointed for a certain commission, maybe, or a committee, but for all the deliberative bodies for voting, it's all democratic. And this is a nice, easy piece of puzzle to kind of show the history of the Presbyterian Church in the U.S., just in case you thought we were monolithic and haven't changed much. That's where you are today. And there's still a number of different Presbyterian denominations, if you will. So if you go travel elsewhere, as my daughter Stephanie did when she went to California, there's Presbyterian churches and there's Presbyterian churches. And they have different theologies. Generally speaking, the same polity, still electing, still having elders and such, just what they tend to emphasize in their mission. And the structure that we have is hierarchical, like almost any elected body, if you will. So we have at the bottom, if you will, the core, the foundation, I should say, is all the congregation. The ones who are, therefore voting in conjunction with presbytery on the minister and other aspects. And then you have presbytery, which is kind of coordinating all these different churches and sessions, and they're providing counsel for if there's issues or selling property or a number of other things they have going on. The next level is synod, which is like the entire Northeast for us, which is really to help with some funding of some things, with some training, some guidance, and they've just been reinventing themselves as well. And at the top level is General Assembly. Now it gets a little confusing. I always thought it was confusing because General Assembly meets once every 2 years. So it's like, but isn't there someone in Louisville, Kentucky, like doing stuff every day? And is that not General Assembly? It's like, no, that's not General Assembly. Because General Assembly is, again, we get commissioned by presbytery. So I went, along with Hannah Ratcliffe from New Hartford Presbyterian Church, the minister there. And we were commissioned by the presbytery, so we're representing the entire presbytery. But like any elected official, we get to decide how we should vote based upon what is there. So we're not obligated to carry forward what the presbytery may want. If we're there and we think things should be different, we vote our conscience. And there's a lot of voting, which I'll talk about in just a moment. Now, what I have found when I went, the ideal commissioner is someone who is extroverted, can go and sit down and make friends with someone in 2 seconds, like my older son does. And you want that same person to love session meetings on steroids. Like they just think session meetings, don't have enough voting and deliberation. You want like 10 times that amount. So if you are both those things, ideal commissioner. I'm not both those things. And then looking at it from this perspective, you have the sessions, presbytery, synods, general assembly, and then there's all these different boards and commissions. We're probably familiar with the Office of General Assembly and the Presbyterian Mission Agency because we donate money for our causes, particularly at our special offerings at Christmas. Presbyterian Mission Agency, we do that no more. And then, so there is a legal corporation that you need in order to exist in the secular world. Someone has to, file paperwork and income taxes and stuff like that. And that's called the A Corporation. I mean, A is like the name, not like, a smaller case A. It's like A Corporation is the name of the entity, legal entity that, runs things, if you will. So A Corp, you'll hear a lot. It took me a while to figure out, okay, it's a corporation, what's the name of it? A Corp, like who's on first? And then what's happened in the past few years is they've merged Office of General Assembly and Presbyterian Mission Agency into a new one called Presbyterian Life and Witness. And it has been, in this particular one, which I'll talk about in a moment, very controversial because it involved a lot of layoffs as part of merging. And so that was probably the number one emotional issue at the General Assembly. So General Assembly this year was in Wisconsin, Milwaukee, at the Baird Center primarily. A number of activities. I won't go into all of them that I did. But this was the meeting hall, looking at it from the back before we fill it out. It's like stadium seating, like there's 3 sections, and each section has a big screen so you can see what's going on because you can't see the people up on stage that are way down. And that gives you kind of an idea. I know it's kind of hard to see in here, but, as it's filling up with people. And just so you know, I was there with Hannah. We're like in row D. So we had pretty good seats, to see what was going on and all that. And we're on the corner aisle, so that made it easy. And the theme, as I have on here, was persevering toward wholeness. And the reason I picked the Isaiah passage was that was kind of a passage they had as their theme going into General Assembly. And we've used that theme also in One Great Hour of Sharing, being repairers of the breach. And so that's a key theme that's been going throughout PCUSA for a number of years. So now to get to the exciting parts, is that trying to summarize all the things that we voted on would be difficult. There were committee meetings, so I had to do committee meetings online. I had to do research and study because there was like 100. I had like 50 resolutions I had to review and be up on with a lot of commentary. And we all met virtually in the committee. We voted on them. Then we go to Wisconsin, and then we go through all the committees. And there's like a dozen committees, so there was probably, I don't know, hundreds of things that we had to deliberate. It's a motion, discussion, voting, all electronically. Everyone had to stand up. They had to be recognized. Yes, I can see people are just saying, where could I go to volunteer to attend such a wonderful event? I don't mind it so much. It's almost like what I used to do in my secular life for business anyway. So for me, it was just more frustrating of people liking to hear themselves speak as opposed to let's just vote on it and move on, if you will. So there's an awful lot that we voted on, and I tried to summarize it here a bit. And the reason I'm going over this, if you will, today, besides my other reasons, is this is us. So we think, too often we think of, oh, Presbyterians, them, and Senate, who knows what they do, and there's this General Assembly every couple of years, and I guess sometimes we have to vote on changing the Book of Order, but, you know, we've got a pie sale coming up and, you know, other things, so I'm not going to worry about it. But this is, in a certain sense, an identity of who we are. It doesn't mean you have to agree with everything, but when you say you're Presbyterian Church USA, this is the kind of things that we're saying who we are and what we do. And you should be aware of it. You may not agree. You can say, well, they do that. I don't agree. But this is who we are. So one is on public service and social witness, and a big one that came up was white Christian nationalism. And I wrote about that in my column in June, I think, June or July I did. And that was a big issue to the point that they are going to propose, it takes many years for these deliberations to happen, to change the Book of Order to say that white Christian nationalism is a theological error. And like, no. Like, not just we're going to say no, like we're going to put it in our Book of Order that says, no, that's not, it may be white, it may be nationalist, it's not Christian. And that was probably a very big one. And it had permutations, which I'll talk about. And the reason you say, well, okay, but why is that, or why is that a big deal? I'll talk a little bit more of that in a moment. The other is, obviously, it's a very sensitive issue on Israel and Gaza. And historically, of course, the United States, as well as I would say, Christians in modern times, outside of Nazi Germany, have supported Israel in its right for defend itself. But all countries, as the prophets, as Amos and Hosea and Jeremiah, it doesn't mean that you're guilt-free, that you still have a responsibility to be good to other people, even if it means while defending yourself. And right now, and not to get into it, but what's going on in Gaza really is not a defense, but it's really genocide. And so there's a rejection of the actions of the Israeli government, while not saying that Israel itself, it's not anti-Zionist, but it's separating what a government is doing versus what they are. Frankly, the same thing in our own country. Many people who want to, say I'm a good American, but I'm not happy with what our government is doing. It doesn't. If you speak against the government doesn't mean you're speaking against the country, and that's what this was trying to articulate, to say there's one thing to defend, there's another to, and there was a whole nother night of many, many different things going on. One thing, and it's way too many, but what I was overwhelmed with is the number of different, I don't even call them committees, but different groups that are doing so many different kinds of things, whether it's peacemaking or hunger or whatever, that I wasn't even aware of, that's going on, that we could be part of. And it's very moving to see what so many people are doing in that regard. The other one that came up was AI. Interesting, I have found, I would have expected, people of a certain generation might have found AI to be threatening. I find there's a lot of young people that find AI threatening. Ones in their 20s, which I would have thought they would have been, adopt technology like they, adopt everything else. And they were a lot of anti-AI. And so, to the point where they don't want AI to be used in creating sermons and in academic and such like that. And I don't feel that way about AI per se. AI, in my mind, is another tool. It can be abused, just like the internet could, just like fire could, just like electricity could. I mean, it's like another thing. But to avoid AI would mean, like, don't Google anymore, and don't try to use a camera that's going to automatically focus your camera. You're not going to get away from it. Now, there are responsible uses, of course, but you're not turning off any spigot, for AI not to come. But there's a lot of people, they voted on saying, okay, we can't do that. And I'm glad they did this after I did that sermon a couple of years ago, when I had a whole thing done in AI, and Rob read it for me. So I won't do that again. And gender-affirming care and immigration. In general, there's, of course, our denomination in particular, as per the words I had from Luke today, of helping the poor, the marginalized, the oppressed. This is more reaffirming, and it comes up because there are various, as you well know, we're also having a healthcare crisis in general, but ones that are, you know, on the margins are being overly discriminated against. In one sense, it's one thing if we're all equally discriminated. It's another to say we're going to discriminate against these people even more. And so part of this was a witness to that, to say, no, that's just not right. We're all human beings. You know, we all should be treated equally, equitably, if you will. And of course, immigration, you know, has been an issue, continues to be an issue for us, and won't go in that here. But again, I was trying to affirm, you know, that we're all human beings, deserve to be treated as human beings. Even if you're breaking a law, or even if you're violating something, that doesn't give you a right to not do that. And along those same lines, we had a whole committee, a couple of committees on gender and sexuality, and one thing that came up is that some LGBTQIA plus candidates were interviewing, like with, you know, presbyteries and sessions, and things were going along well until they find out that they're, you know, not straight. Then all of a sudden things changed, and then it's like, in one sense, okay, but would have been nice if we'd had this kind of clearing of the air beforehand. And so this is basically just saying, okay, let's just kind of all put our cards on the table up front in terms of what is going to be, we think, is a good fit. Now, there's obviously a gray area about discriminating against someone just because of their sexual orientation and such. But this was really, Hannah Ratliff had actually experienced this herself in her call and such, and so she was supportive of, you know, of this measure as being, you know, more fair and more open and such. And on these kinds of things, to tell you the truth, I tend to vote the way that people are being affected, you know, are, because I have enjoyed virtually every privilege that my position has. And then part of this also got into family structures. And again, the definition of families have become fluid even, you know, in the 20th century. And so what the family structures are, you know, across the board. And that's why it's family structure. It isn't just about what would be two fathers, two mothers, or not. It's also with divorced people, it's with mixed families, it's the whole thing, and how do we deal and support that, if you will. And so that was a very a big issue as well. It also included about marriage, you know, and there was initiatives about wanting ministers to be monogamous and such, which on the surface sounds okay, except when you start to peel it away. Suppose they're single and they're dating, or, you know, or different orientation. So there was a lot of things that had this veneer of like, oh, that sounds like good, except the intention was really to take away rights. And then there's all the internal operations and polity. And as I mentioned, the World Mission Accountability, people are very, very upset with how it was handled, this unification, and so they want a whole investigative committee into it, which I'll talk a little bit more in a moment. And a part of that was, and my committee actually dealt with it. I had constitutional interpretation, by the way, so, you know, again, good fit for me. But there's this whole thing about what they were allowed to say or not to say, and my perspective was it was a very emotional issue, a lot of heat, not a lot of light. And then the other huge thing was returning to in-person assemblies for everything. So they used to meet, and Pat did it years ago, you know, you went down to wherever, and you were there the entire time. So it was like 2 weeks. You got to be there for your committee, there's other things going on, and the plan, it's like a big, huge time commitment. The flip side of it is, I can tell you, being in committee on a Zoom call for 10 hours when the technology is not working is not particularly appealing either. if you will. And it could be so much more efficient if we could all be here in person. If you have to stand up to a mic, if I know you're standing up to the mic, then I know what's going on, but you don't have that when you're online. So I said we should get it all back together from beginning to end. Which I agree is good. The price for that will be time and money, because you got to make that much more commitment. So to finding commissioners who want to do it now and to say, I want you to spend 2 weeks or 10 days someplace. I'm sorry? Yeah. So with traveling and all of that. Yeah. So it's going to be, that'll be a challenge, but there'll be pluses to that. And the next one is in 2028 is going to be in Puerto Rico for the first time. And so a lot of people are very excited about going to Puerto Rico for the first time. And then financial adjustments. What I found interesting was it's kind of like Congress in that resolutions would come up, overtures, we would vote on them, and there was always, every single one had, here's what we want, here's the reason for it, here's these other advisory people, they had youth and seminary and others to give advice to those of us voting. We didn't have to take it, we got their advice. And then there would always be a cost element. What would it cost to do this thing? And some were trivial and some were significant, like in person is going to be significant. So you vote on each one of these in committee, then you vote on them in plenary, and then every day the finance guy got up and said, okay, as of right now this is going to affect per capita by this amount. It was not in their head. And on the last day in the morning, we're going to have to leave in 3 hours. He says, okay, here's the budget for the next 2 years, and here's what the per capita is going to be. And the response was, oh my gosh, that's so much money. And all I could say is, like, this was not the time, people. I don't know what part along the way did you not think at the end, you know, it's like, I mean, you know, $10 here, $10 there, it adds up when you add it up. And so they finally voted on the budget and approved it. But it's kind of like, you know, when we have our spending bills, like, oh my gosh, our debt limit's been exceeded. Well, yeah, you voted on that last year. I don't know why you guys are surprised, and gals. So anyway, so per capita is going to go up. The only thing I would say is that the initiatives that they have planned, I believe, I agree with 90% of them. There's always some that you say, I don't know if I would have done it that way. But most of them are worthwhile. And so now you could argue, is it really worth us all paying that? That's why I'm kind of going over this, where you can say, all right, I don't understand the details, but I'll trust them. So some observations. Presbyterian Life and Witness is off to a rough start. Very rough start. The moderator, the clerk, the General Assembly clerk is the one who was elected last year to be head of it. She was just put through the ringer. I mean, it was very, very not good. And something happened. I think the problem was everyone's like, yeah, we should integrate, we should blah, 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 and do all this, until the time comes, they're like, okay, that means basically no more mission workers. This isn't the 19th century. We're not going to send people off to Africa to convert people. We're doing other mission activities, not missionary classical conversion. And those people are the ones that basically got laid off, and they didn't like it. They didn't like the way they thought it was handled. Coming from industry, I can tell you, handled it 10 times better than I've seen it handled, but, you know, that's me. And in fact, it got so bad that, you know, even somebody else commented on one of the resolutions. It's like, it almost became retribution and recrimination. They were that upset about it. It was that much of an emotional issue. And I say that not to air dirty laundry, you know, here online, but more a matter of we all struggle to do what we, you know, how do we do going forward? And it all sounds good at the surface. When you actually go to implement things, it's always going to be a challenge at any level that we have, and we've experienced that ourselves as a church over our decades. White Christian nationalism. When I say I'm trying to find another way of saying it, but I can't find another way of saying it. Not only as we have it at the national level, there is an entire movement, as I found out, not there per se, but from others, that there's a national movement for white Christian nationalists to infiltrate mainline denominations at decision-making levels to try to bring them back into the fold from their perspective. And here at General Assembly, it was the youth delegates. There was an entire group of youth delegates that were putting forth resolutions and comments and such, and you could identify them because they were dressed in suits and ties, the men, and women in nice dresses and such like that. It was classic 1950. And they were actively trying to, get in and, put things in that sounded good, on the surface, but the real purpose was to reinforce white Christian nationalism. And so I say that because it isn't just like a national issue, it's something that, a movement that's trying to get its fingers into everything, if you will. And of course, we continue to struggle with sexuality issues. I just got to be honest, it's like we've got war and poverty and, discriminations, and, in healthcare. We got a lot of issues. The last thing I'm concerned about is sexuality. Jesus wasn't overly concerned about it, except how women got treated and wanted them to get treated better. That's all he cared about. I care about the poor, the oppressed, the blind, the marginalized. So, like I said, strong overtures to support LGBTQIA+, and then others who want to still have some throwback, if you will, to how things were. And, of course, Presbyterian polity is a two-edged sword. Shared leadership, democratic elections, deliberations and thought about what to do. Great stuff. I think, we would all think that's a good thing to do. It moves at the speed of a glacier. We had 900 people in that hall. No, really 1,000. We had 1,000 people in that hall. And everyone was allowed, almost everyone was allowed to have a voice. So you had a bunch of microphones, and they could come up, and they could comment, they could make an amendment, they could amend an amendment, they could do all kinds of things. And when we get done with all of that, okay, we're going to do a study for next year that then we may put in the Book of Order that we then vote on in 2020, 30, and it's like, the world may not even be around then. Which is why authoritarian models are so attractive to people these days, because let's just get something done. And yeah, there'll be a few things, broken glass along the way, but let's at least get something done. So you have to trade off whether you want the authoritarianism or you want shared leadership. Bottom line, though, is we as a church are trying to be more Christ-like and not dogmatic. And I think that the one thing that separates white Christian nationalists from, say, others is the dogmatism. You have to believe this thing, as opposed to what are you doing to show Christ in the world. And I would say our denomination, our church, our congregation, we are along those lines. So that's a top level message to take away, if you will. And I think I'm done for today. If you have more questions, this is the kind of thing when my grandson would ask me, he goes, well, why is there Veterans Day, Memorial Day? And he did this a few years ago. And I then, of course, proceeded to give him a 20th century history lesson. And after, it was only 40 minutes, he said, okay, Grandpa, I won't ask you any questions anymore. And I'm sure you feel the same way. Now let's turn to God and our praise in Him.